भक्त वेदांता स्वामी नित्यानंद नमः Krishna Paraya, Krishna Pristaya, Bhutale, Shamate Bhakti Vedanta, Swami Nityanamine, Namaste, Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Brahmacharine, Nirvishesha Shunyapadi Vastutyadishitari Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyapadi Vastutyadishitari Jai Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Hari Bol Jai Gaura Hari Bol Jai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Jai Gaura Hari Bol Jaya Vara Hare Jaya Vara Hare Vara Hare Jaya Vara Hare Jaya Vara Hare Vara Hare Vara Hare Jaya Vara Hare Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Shri Shantai Gaura Hari Ki Jai. Auspicious appearance day of Srila Varahadev Ki Jai, Srila Varahadev Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Shantai Gaura Hari. So again, Hare Krishna everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening for our discussions on teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So let's begin with our prayers. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gnananvinashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pucharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastrati Deshatarine. So we've been discussing this chapter 26 of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. This is a wonderful work by Srila Prabhupada, which is based on the authorized biography of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu called the Chaitanya Charitamrita by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So this chapter 26 is called the Bhattacharya is Converted, and it's basically the conclusion of the Lord preaching to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. He was a very famous impersonalist follower of Advaita Mayavadi in the area of Jagannath Puri 500 years ago. And he attempted to preach to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu about impersonalism. And then the Lord preached to him about the true meaning of the Vedanta. Impersonalist philosophy is often based on the Vedanta. And after that, the Bhattacharya was convinced and he submitted to the Lord and to devotional service to him. So we will begin with the invocation prayer, which is verse 18 of the first chapter of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktivinoda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktivinoda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhaktivinoda. And the translation is glory to Shri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Shri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So we'll carry on reading. It is said that at this time, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya composed 100 verses in appreciation of the Lord's activities. And so that's quite a feat, 100 Sanskrit verses. And that those verses were so great that they could not be surpassed even by Brihaspati, the greatest learned scholar in the heavenly planets. So we may find this a little bit interesting because we said previously that Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is actually an incarnation of Brihaspati. But we also said that the inhabitants of the heavenly planets, although they're vastly learned and materially very well situated, they're not necessarily pure devotees. And the Bhattacharya, well, he's been transformed to a pure devotee. So certainly his abilities can now supersede the abilities of anyone in the material world, even those who inhabit the heavenly planets, because those are still material planets. And his abilities have now become spiritual by the mercy of the Lord. The Lord was very much pleased to hear these 100 verses, and he embraced the Bhattacharya. Now, of course, this is not because Lord Chaitanya enjoys himself being praised. That's a point that we're going to see a little later on. But it is more the transformation in the Bhattacharya that he's appreciating. The Bhattacharya became overwhelmed with ecstasy by the Lord's touch, and he practically fell unconscious. He cried, trembled, shivered, and perspired, and sometimes he danced and sang and fell at the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya. And so these are not common responses. This is actually ecstasy, the highest spiritual ecstasy. The Bhattacharya's brother-in-law, Gopinath Acharya, and the devotees of the Lord were surprised to see the Bhattacharya transformed into a great devotee. So if we're wondering what's the big deal, why is everybody getting so worked up over this transformation? It is because of how staunch the followers of impersonalism are, right? We can imagine if you know someone who actually is an atheist or somebody who is totally against Krishna, and you multiply that a few times over, this is pretty much how an impersonalist is, especially a scholar of the magnitude of the Bhattacharya. Right? There's so much against the personal form of the Lord and devotional service because they believe this to be material. Right? They preach very much against it. So the Bhattacharya, as an avowed impersonalist, this transformation is not ordinary at all. Right? It's something quite amazing. Just imagine that you're seeing your atheist friend or colleague or person that you know chanting and dancing in ecstasy, not just attending a program and like sort of politely observing it, but literally absorbed in ecstasy. So this is what's happening to the Bhattacharya here. So this is obviously bringing great pleasure to the Lord, because there's a very interesting pastime that it hurts him when the Advaitins, when the Mayavadis preach against him, preach against his form. So it's a very fitting pastime for today, because today is the appearance day of Lord Varahadev. So he is the boy incarnation of the Lord. And in Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, Lord Chaitanya actually took the form of Varahadev in the house of his dear devotee Murari Gupta. So Lord Varahadev had appeared to save the earth, because a great demon named Hiranyaksha had mined so much gold from the earth that he had upset the delicate forces that keep the earth within its orbit. And because of that, the earth actually fell into the Garbhadaka ocean. Because something, of course, we're not aware of, something which material science can't show us, is that all the universe is actually suspended in the shell, and the Garbhadaka ocean is actually filling the shell in about half. And the Lord Garbhadaksha Vishnu, he's lying down on this ocean, right? So you can imagine this great shell of the material universe, and it's half filled with the Garbhadaka ocean. Lord Garbhadaksha Vishnu is lying on it. The lotus stem that has come out of his navel is rising above him, and within the stem of within the stem of this lotus is all the planetary systems, including us. Right? And at the top of that lotus stem is Lord Brahma. So it's basically how the universe is arranged. So the earth has literally fallen out of its position and fallen into the bottom of this Garbhadaka ocean. And Lord Varahadevi comes to save the earth, because that is his eternal consort. And then he fights this demon who has allowed the earth to fall into such a terrible position. And after that he rescues. After he kills the demon, then the earth is placed back into orbit. So basically, when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took this form of Varahadev in Murari Gupta's house, then he actually told Murari Gupta that to hear the words of the impersonalists, particularly at the time he was referring to the impersonalists of Benares or Varanasi, we discussed the conversion of these impersonalists a few chapters back. He said that the words of the chief of those impersonalists, Prakashananda Saraswati, he said it hurts his body. It hurts his transcendental body, because they're attacking his form. Impersonalists are saying that the form is Maya. Krishna's form is Maya. It's like all of our forms, which are temporary. And although it may not physically hurt the Lord, but it does hurt him to hear these words being spoken against him, in the same way that when Hiranyaksha called Lord Varahadev, "You amphibious beast." It's quite a pretty nasty thing to call someone, right? A beast. It is said that the Lord was hurt by these words. Right? Sri Prabhupada says in Srimad Bhagavatam. So the words of the impersonalists, they're not to be taken lightly. Right? They may be dangerous to us, because they may actually convince us against the form of the Lord, but they're actually hurtful to the Lord. So we have to be careful, like we said so many times before, not to listen to them. But we're also very happy when they've been transformed, like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, so that they can desist from actually hurting the Lord by speaking badly of his form. So basically, anyone who speaks like this, whether it's the atheists, the demons, the Mayavadis, it's all quite terrible, as we can see. And now we can see why the Lord is so happy that Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya has been transformed. Right? This is the importance of his conversion. So now we will read a bit more about Gopinathacharya. So Gopinathacharya is the brother-in-law of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and he wanted so much for the Bhattacharya to become a devotee, because he himself, Gopinath's a devotee of the Lord. Gopinath Acharya then began to thank the Lord. "It is by your grace only that the Bhattacharya has been transform from his stone-like position into such a devotee? Lord Chaitanya replied to Gopinath Acharya that it was due to a devotee's favor that a stone-like man could be transformed into a mild, flower-like devotee. Actually, Gopinath Acharya had sincerely wished that his brother-in-law, the Bhattacharya, would become a devotee of the Lord. He had sincerely desired that the Lord favored the Bhattacharya, and he was glad to see that his desire had been fulfilled by Lord Chaitanya. In other words, a devotee of the Lord is more merciful than the Lord himself. When a devotee desires to show his mercy to a person, the Lord accepts him, and by the Lord's grace, he becomes a devotee. So the Lord's mercy is still needed, his grace is still needed in the end. But what starts off the process is a devotee showing their mercy. And this is very important because the Lord takes seriously when his devotee shows mercy to somebody. So we can explain this in many ways, and we have before, we'll just touch on it now, that getting the mercy of a devotee is like getting an introduction, a personal introduction by a friend of a very important person, right? Or a personal aid to the president, right? Something like that. It means that the Lord trusts this pure devotee to grant such mercy, and so he gives himself, which is not something that's very easily achieved, but he gives himself to anybody who gets the mercy of a pure devotee. Also, we can understand that the Lord respects our independence so much that he's not going to force himself on us. He's not going to force devotional service on us. Right? He takes a very neutral stance. But his devotees, when they choose to show their mercy on someone, right, this is out of their kindness and their love, that they don't consider our independence. Right? They come forth and they offer us the opportunity to engage in devotional service. And if we're fortunate enough to recognize what they're offering us, then we may take to it. And this is when the Lord shows us his mercy, and he agrees to allow us into the path of bhakti. So it's not actually such an easy thing. The rareness of devotional service is explained many times. It's many factors that have to come together. Primarily, the mercy of a devotee must be there. And then, of course, there must be some effort from our side, and there must be mercy from the Lord. And then, of course, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, that there must be some background of piety as well. But even if that background is not there, the mercy of the mercy of the devotee makes up for all of that. And this is what leads to someone taking to devotional service. So here we can see that although Lord Chaitanya showed his mercy, he was actually more showing his mercy as God. But the mercy of a devotee came from Gopinath Acharya. It was because Gopinath Acharya wanted so much for Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to take to devotional service that the Lord showed his mercy in the end. And we can see that the Lord is actually the one giving credit to Gopinath for this. It's similar to how in Varanasi, the great devotees Tapan Mishra and Chandrasekhar Acharya, they wanted the Lord to meet the Mayavadi sannyasis. And so because they desired this, right, they as great and pure devotees, then Lord Chaitanya gave his mercy, and so these sannyasis took to devotional service. Lord Chaitanya pacified the Bhattacharya because the Bhattacharya was in quite extraordinary ecstasy. Lord Chaitanya pacified the Bhattacharya and asked him to go home. The Bhattacharya again began to praise the Lord and said, "You have descended to deliver all the fallen souls of this material world. That project is not so difficult for you. But you have turned a stone-hearted man like me into a devotee, and that is very wonderful indeed. Although I was very expert at logical arguments and grammatical explanations of the Vedas, I was as hard as a lump of iron. But your influence and temperature was so great that you could melt even a hard piece of iron like me." So Srila Prabhupada has described this many times, that material life, it makes us hard-hearted. Right? Material desires in particular, they kind of do that to us. And we can see how, for material desires, people do many cruel things. They hurt and harm even those who are dearest to them. We may wonder how it's possible, right? And it's simply because of the influence of the material nature, right? Or the desire for material things. The material influence is very, very strong. So the only way that one can actually cultivate love for all beings and people is to be situated on the spiritual platform by loving he who resides in the heart of all people, all things, and that is the Supreme Lord. Without that love for the Lord, it's not going to be possible to achieve the ideals that people desire so much, which is brotherhood of man and unity amongst all of God's creatures and loving thy neighbor, right? Those are very noble sentiments, but it's very hard to achieve. We can see that almost nobody is actually at that level after so many thousands, even millions of years of aspiring for it. And it's simply because unless we attain to love of the Lord, we're not going to be able to achieve that. So how do we understand this? So we'll read some statements from the 29th chapter of Krishna book, right? Statements by the gopis to Krishna. And this will help us understand better. Our husbands, friends, family members, and children are all dear and pleasing to us only because of your presence. For you are the super soul of all living creatures. Without your presence, one is worthless. When you leave the body immediately dies, and according to the injunction of the Shastras, a dead body must immediately be thrown into a river or burned. Therefore, ultimately, you are the dearmost personality in this world. So that's quite clear, isn't it? When we recognize the super soul within the heart of all beings, and we love that super soul, then we actually love everyone because of our awareness of the presence of the super soul in their heart. Right? Without that, right, everybody is just, well, practically dead to us. Right? And this is, again, the reason why we can be so cruel or sometimes even outwardly dangerous to those we even care about, what to speak of others. Right? This is because we actually don't have any real sentiment for anyone without loving the Supreme Lord. Actually, that's the truest kind of love there is. And another example we can use is somebody like Arjuna. He went through so many difficulties by the Kauravas. One would think that he would immediately take the opportunity to kill them, considering that they had basically tried to kill him and his dear ones all his life. But instead, he wanted to do the opposite, not out of cowardice, but because of that love. Because he was a pure devotee and he loved all, right? Because he could see the super soul and he loved the super soul, the Supreme Lord Krishna. He couldn't find himself harming anyone, and much less his cousins and other relatives who were on the battlefield against him. And so this is the great compassion of a devotee that Srila Prabhupada brings out in the Bhagavad Gita in the first chapter, because the devotee is seeing the super soul in everyone's heart, and this is how the devotee actually loves everyone and everything. So we could make a little subtle point here, though, that when a devotee reaches that level, it's called the Brahma Bhuta platform. Right? We'll remember this verse from chapter 5 of Bhagavad Gita. Vidyavanaya sampane brahmane gavihachini shuni cheva shupakecha pandita samadarshinaha. When the pandita, when that learned person reaches that stage of samadarshinaha, seeing everyone as equal, it's important that they see everyone as equal, being servants of God, right? Then, of course, developing their love for Krishna will mean they will develop their love for everyone. But the problem with the impersonalists is they also get to the stage, right? Generally through the path of Jnana Yoga, but others may also be impersonalists on the path of Ashtanga Yoga. And if they get to this path, then how do they see everybody as equal? They don't see everyone as servants of God. They see everyone as God, like themselves. And we said before that if we're seeing ourselves as God, then that's the ultimate expression of the false ego. And if we haven't conquered the false ego, then it's not possible to actually love everyone. Right? Because when we're in the false ego, essentially we're in a state of selfishness. So it's important that reaching the stage of Brahma Bhuta, seeing everybody as equal, is done through Bhakti Yoga. Right? It's done through love and not through the false ego as it is through the other parts. Right? So it's a little subtlety there. So the Bhattacharya previously, he had reached this level of Brahma Bhuta, but he had done it in the false ego. And that's why he approached the Lord with so much of false ego. That's why he approached the Lord with a hard heart. But now the Lord, by his great mercy, had melted that heart. And this is the wonderful miracle of bhakti. So it is another point that we were discussing yesterday about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, when he was confronted by a well-known academic to explain some questions based on Vedanta. He told the academic to go help the devotees who were doing some, we could consider menial servant, right? They were washing dishes, menial service, they were washing dishes. So the academic was quite concerned. He didn't feel like his questions were going to be answered by them. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur urged him on. And somehow in washing the dishes, this academic, he was able to achieve the answer to his questions. And when he went back, he was quite amazed, and he told Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur what happened. And the Thakur explained that this is actually the result of engaging in devotional service. Through devotional service, one actually gets the knowledge, real knowledge, of Krishna, knowledge that will actually liberate us from the material world. So this is a superiority, the natural superiority of bhakti over jnana. Krishna himself says in Bhagavad Gita that if we're constantly serving him with love, he'll give the understanding by which we can come to him. This is an understanding we can't get on our own if we engage in the search for knowledge. Lord Caitanya then returned to his place, and the Bhattacharya sent Gopinathacharya to him, that is to Lord Caitanya, with various kinds of prasadam from the Jagannath temple. The next day, the Lord went to the temple of Jagannath early in the morning to attend Mangal Arti. The priests in the temple brought him a garland from the deity and also offered him various kinds of prasadam. The Lord was very much pleased to receive them, and he at once went to the house of the Bhattacharya, taking the prasadam and flower garland to present to him. So we can see this nice exchange. The Lord is following the example of giving prasad, accepting prasad, and giving gifts and offering gifts. Right? Srila Rupa Goswami teaches us in the Nectar of Instructions. Although it was early in the morning, the Bhattacharya understood that the Lord had come and was knocking on his door. He at once rose from his bed and began to say, Krishna, Krishna. This was heard by Lord Caitanya. When the Bhattacharya opened the door, he saw the Lord standing there, and he was very much pleased to see him early in the morning. Receiving him with all care, the Bhattacharya offered him a nice seat, and both of them sat there. Lord Caitanya then offered him the prasadam he had received in the temple of Jagannath, and the Bhattacharya was very glad to receive this prasadam from the hands of Lord Caitanya himself. Indeed, without taking his bath and without performing his daily duties or even cleansing his teeth, he immediately began to eat the prasadam. In this way, he was freed from all material contamination and attachment. So this is a very important anecdote. Right? It has very deep meaning, but it's not really precedent. Right? We should be careful to understand what this pastime is teaching us. It doesn't mean that we ordinary souls can actually skip bathing and brushing our teeth and so on. Sometimes when we're traveling, it may be impossible to maybe take a bath. Sometimes we may just be able to brush our teeth, and we may have to honor some prasadam. But as a rule, we should always be fully cleansed. But the meaning to this pastime, actually, we get the idea from the second verse of the Nectar of Instruction, why it's different for the Bhattacharya and different for us. So this verse 2 of the Nectar of Instruction states, one's devotional service is spoiled when he becomes too entangled in the following 6 activities. 1 is eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required. 2 is over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. 3 is talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. 4 is practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. 5 is associating with worldly-minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And 6 is being greedy for mundane achievements. So did you catch the point, right? It's number 4. Practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them. This is the Bhattacharya. This is what he was doing, right? The Mayavadis are, and in general, right, the Advaitans, the impersonalists, also caste Brahmins in particular, without being offensive. But they tend to follow the rules for the sake of it, right? They're very ritualistic, and they're not actually doing this for the purpose of pleasing the Lord, or for making real spiritual advancement and devotional service towards him. Right? Their practice is therefore fairly artificial. It's a lot of show and not so much for any real good for themselves or for anyone else, and especially not for the Lord. So this is why Lord Chaitanya was happy to see that he was casting off these rules, because basically it was part of his Mayavad behavior or philosophy or lifestyle. But now us, we're not in that category, because the same point 4 says that to practice the rules and regulations for the sake of following them is bad, but also rejecting the rules and regulations and working independently or whimsically. That's all of us. Right? We're all quite guilty of that. And we don't like following the rules, we like bending them as much as possible and so on. So for us, rules are good. Rules are important. It's not the same as the Bhattacharya. For us, the rules will help us to actually get to the level of spirituality. For him, the rules were hindering his advancement in devotional service. So this is why Lord Chaitanya was happy to see that he broke the rules, and this is why we need to actually follow the rules. As the Bhattacharya began to eat the prasadam, he recited a verse from the Padma Purana. There it is stated that when prasadam is received, it must be eaten immediately, even if it has become very dry or old, or even if it is brought from a distant place, or even if one has not completed executing his daily duties. Since it is enjoined in the Shastras that prasadam should immediately be taken, there is no restriction of time, place, or atmosphere. The order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead must be followed. There are restrictions one must follow before accepting food from various people, but there are no restrictions on accepting prasadam from all kinds of people. Prasadam is always transcendental and can be taken under any condition. Okay, so this is important for us to also understand. But in particular for Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, the lesson was that for Advaitans, Mayavadis, or impersonalists, they don't consider anything about the Lord transcendental. Right? Not his form, not his name, not his qualities, not his pastimes, and not his prasadam. For them, these things are just ordinary, more displays of Maya. And so they wouldn't understand the transcendental value of something like prasadam. And considering it ordinary food, like Prabhupada says here, there are restrictions you must follow. Right? You don't accept food, for example, from just anyone, anywhere, and any time. But Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya had thankfully passed that. Right? He wasn't at the level of an Advaitan anymore. He actually understood the value of prasadam now because he was now a devotee of the Lord, and therefore, considering it transcendental, he actually broke all his rules, and the way one is actually supposed to honor prasad, and he was very pleased to accept it from Lord Chaitanya in this way. Lord Chaitanya was very much pleased to see that the Bhattacharya, who had always obeyed the rules and regulations strictly, accepted prasadam without following any rules and regulations. Being so pleased, Lord Chaitanya embraced the Bhattacharya, and they both began to dance in transcendental ecstasy. In that ecstasy, Lord Chaitanya exclaimed, "My mission in Jagannath Puri is now fulfilled. I have converted a person like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. I shall now be able to attain Vaikuntha without fail." Okay, so this is a very interesting statement of the Lord. Of course, acting as the devotee, he is stating this, but it means that if we're a little concerned about whether we'll attain Vaikuntha by becoming pure devotees ourselves, we just need to convert somebody else, right, to being a pure devotee of the Lord. And Lord Krishna himself mentions in the Bhagavad Gita about how this makes one so dear to him. And what does he say? For one who explains the supreme secret to devotees, pure devotional service is guaranteed. And what is that pure devotional service? Pure devotional service is liberation. Right? It's guaranteed entrance into Vaikuntha. So this is Lord Chaitanya actually demonstrating this statement of Krishna from Bhagavad Gita. And at the end, he will come back to me. There is no servant in this world more dear to me than he, nor will there ever be one more dear. So we carry on reading. The missionary goal of a devotee is to convert simply one person into a pure devotee, right? Just one. And we remember Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had said this so many times. If he just made one pure devotee, his entire mission would be successful. Then the devotee's admission to the spiritual kingdom is guaranteed. The Lord was so much pleased with the Bhattacharya that he began to bless him repeatedly. Dear Bhattacharya, now you are a completely pure devotee of Lord Krishna, and Krishna is now very much pleased with you. From today, you are free from the contamination of this material body and entanglement under the spell of the material energy. You are now fit to go back to Godhead, back home. The Lord then cited a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. We'll just read the translation of this. Whoever takes complete shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord is favored by the Supreme Lord, who is known to be unlimited. Such a person also receives permission to cross the ocean of nescience. However, one who is under the misconception that his material body is himself cannot receive the causeless mercy, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. After this incident, Lord Caitanya returned to his place, and the Bhattacharya became a pure and faultless devotee. Since he had formerly been a great academic scholar, the Bhattacharya could only have been converted by the causeless mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So what is the problem with him being a scholar in particular? So we look to the words of Queen Kunti from Srimad Bhagavatam to understand this. Right? And the translation of one of the famous verses, Canto 1, Chapter 8, Text 26 says, "My Lord, your Lordship can easily be approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted." Right? One who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty, cannot approach you with sincere feeling. So this is not to say that trying to get an education or trying to be respectable or trying to at least maintain oneself financially, right? Not really trying to achieve great opulence, but at least being financially stable. These things are not bad things. Prabhupada has taught us practically how to do these things in a Krishna conscious way. Because the problem, if we're not Krishna conscious while we're doing it, we'll be distracted from spiritual life. Right? And in order to make progress in spiritual life, we have to be dhrida vrata. We have to be determined. This Krishna says in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life whose sinful activities are completely eradicated are freed from the dualities of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. Bhajante mang dhridavrataha. If we don't have that determination, it's very difficult to make progress in devotional service. The amount of distraction that we have in material things, it's actually concomitantly our attention and focus on Krishna is decreased. And this is actually how it is, because anything and everything material is completely the opposite of everything spiritual. And this is the mathematics of the whole thing. So we have to be circumspect without being a little bit too, dare I say, fanatical. But we have to be careful that with our material progress, that we're not spending too much effort on that and not enough on our spiritual practices, that we're not determined enough in our spiritual lives. Right? So whatever we're aiming for, we have to try and use it all in Krishna's service and be conscious of Krishna while we're trying to achieve it, so that we don't lose ground in spiritual life. And this is something very important. And because it's challenging, that's true. We have the support of so many spiritual authorities and our own Shiksha Gurus, others that we can get advice from, so that we can achieve this balance nicely in our lives, and we can make sure that we're moving forward spiritually all the time, and whatever our situation is, and whatever we may be endeavoring for. But we must be careful that there's not too much determination on the material side. It's often a problem for spiritual life. From that day forward, the Bhattacharya never explained any Vedic literature without explaining devotional service. Gopinath Acharya, his brother-in-law, was very much pleased to see the Bhattacharya's condition, and he began to dance in ecstasy and vibrate the transcendental sound, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this is actually the real welfare for others, and not desiring that they progress materially, but desiring that they take to Krishna consciousness, that they take to spiritual life. It's the only thing to actually permanently end anyone's miseries, and this is what Gopinath Acharya wished for his brother-in-law. And his brother-in-law was already a scholar. He was already patronized by the king. He had everything that he needed. But the most important thing that he didn't have was love of Godhead. And so Gopinath Acharya was not satisfied. And when the Bhattacharya achieved this, then Gopinath was in complete ecstasy. And we should also have this wish and hope that everyone that we know will also be able to take to devotional service. And we should want that as the very best for them, and we must encourage them. There's sometimes a little trend of envy when others are making advancement in spiritual life. We should actually try and avoid that as much as possible and push others forward. And this will make the Lord very, very pleased. The next day, after visiting the Jagannath temple early in the morning, the Bhattacharya went to see Lord Caitanya, and he offered his respects by falling down before the Lord. He then began to explain his past undesirable behavior. When he asked the Lord to speak something about devotional service, the Lord began to elaborately explain the verse in the Brihanaradiya Purana, beginning Harinama, Harinama, and we'll complete the verse. Harinama eva kevalam, kalau nashdeva nashdeva gatir anyuta. And the translation is, in this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the only means of deliverance is the chanting of the holy names of the Lord, the chanting of the holy names of the Lord, and the chanting of the holy names of the Lord. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. And Srila Prabhupada has explained this many times, that something that's repeated 3 times is for emphasis, right? That we get it. Because we often need to be told this many times in order for us to get it. We sometimes want there to be more, like Srila Prabhupada says. We want the bitter tasting medicine, because if you give us something that doesn't taste, that tastes nice, we may think, oh, this is not going to work, right? So we want to suffer a little bit for spiritual life, for spiritual advancement, to say, okay, this is something, right? Like yoga, sitting in those positions uncomfortably for so many hours and so on. When we're given something as wonderful as a holy name, which is simple, we think maybe there's something that we're missing in this process. But we hear here in this verse, there's no other way, there's no other way, there's no other way. While hearing this explanation, the Bhattacharya became more and more ecstatic. Seeing the condition of his brother-in-law, Gopinathacharya said, my dear Bhattacharya, previously I had said that when one is favored by the Supreme Lord, he will understand the techniques of devotional service. Today, I am seeing this fulfilled. Then the Bhattacharya offered him his due respect and replied, my dear Gopinathacharya, it is through your mercy that I have received the mercy of the Supreme Lord. The mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be obtained by the mercy of a pure devotee. Lord Chaitanya's mercy was bestowed upon the Bhattacharya because of Gopinathacharya's endeavor. You are a great devotee of the Lord, the Bhattacharya continued, speaking to Gopinathacharya. And I was simply blinded by my academic education. So it is only through your agency that I have obtained the mercy of the Lord. Lord Chaitanya was greatly pleased to hear the Bhattacharya say that a man can achieve the mercy of the Lord through the agency of a devotee. Lord Chaitanya appreciated his words and embraced the Bhattacharya, confirming his statement. Because, like we stated from the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord, he loves his devotees so much, right? Particularly those who are preaching and who are trying to spread the messages, his messages, right, for all the struggling souls. And so he's very happy that Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya has understood this. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya himself will obviously take up this mission as well, right, to the Lord's great pleasure. So we're going to end here for today, because we want to talk a little bit about all the pastimes that are being commemorated these few days. So we will continue this chapter. I think it'll be the last part next week, part 4. So please join us then. Are there any questions or comments or anything that I can try and clarify? Any corrections? If there's none, then I'm going to share my screen quickly for a little slideshow about all of the wonderful personalities that we have been honoring in the last few days. So there we go. Okay, so it's been quite an auspicious week. Last week we actually spoke about Vasan Panchami, and it was the appearance day of many great personalities, as well as the disappearance day of at least one of those great personalities as well. And then the next day, there wasn't any observances, but the day after that, last week Friday, the Saptami, the 7th day of the light half of the month, this was the appearance day of Advaita Acharya. Advaita Acharya is one of Lord Chaitanya's principal associates, and he's actually the incarnation of Mahavishnu, and also the personality Sadashiva. Sadashiva is not exactly Lord Shiva. He's actually an expansion of the Lord, who exists just on the border between the material world and the spiritual world, and he's the origin of Lord Shiva. And together, right, they both, Mahavishnu and Sadashiva, they appeared as this extraordinary, wonderful personality, Advaita Acharya. And Advaitacharya is about 52 years older than Lord Chaitanya, so he's very senior. And when he appeared, he could see the struggling condition of the living entities. And so he prayed, you can see in this picture, he offered to his Shila, Nrsimha Shila, I think. He offered to his Shila, the Shila is the stone form of the Lord, um, who appeared here. You can actually, you see the origin of these wonderful forms of the Lord in the Kali Gandaki River in the Himalayas. So the Lord appeared in this form, the stone form, in a pastime related to the appearance of Devi as Tulsi, as a plant. So therefore, the Lord is very pleased when one offers him, the Lord in the stone form, he's very pleased when one offers him Tulsi. So Advaitacharya, he offered Tulsi leaves and Ganga water. We can see the Ganges behind him. And because of that, Lord Krishna heard the prayers of Advaitacharya. Right? It is said that we actually can purchase the Lord by offering him Ganges water and Tulsi leaves in his stone form. So Advaitacharya prayed so desperately. It's actually described that he roared till his cries were heard by the Lord in the spiritual world. And then Lord Chaitanya appeared, and Advaitacharya was part of his wonderful Sankirtan pastimes in Navadvip, and Advaitacharya would journey to Jagannath Puri as well to join Lord Chaitanya in his pastimes there. So we observed his appearance on Advaita Saptami. So Saptami refers to the seventh day. Right? So Advaitacharya's appearance day is on the seventh day of the light half of the moon in the month of Magh. The Magh month is January, February of the Vaishnav calendar. So the following day is known as Bhishma Astami. So we can figure from that Bhishma Astami is the 8th day of the light half of the month of Magh. And this is actually the disappearance day of Bhishma Dev. So Bhishma Dev, you remember from the Mahabharata, is the great, almost like the great grandfather of the both the 100 sons, the Kauravas, as well as of the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, as well as the 5 sons of Pandu, the Pandavas, including Arjuna, Krishna's dear friend and cousin. So Bhishma Dev had been pierced with so many arrows, right, in the fight with Arjuna that when he fell, eventually, he actually was lying on them like a bed. Right? But this was not considered to him to be anything terrible as much as it may seem to us, because this is how a warrior actually meets death. So we may wonder, why was he still alive after being pierced by so many arrows? So this is because he was given the benediction by his father that he would die when he wanted to. This is because his father had wanted to marry another woman, right, Satyavati, the fisherman's daughter. And Bhishma Dev was the one who was meant to be king. So Satyavati's father wanted her sons to be king. So Bhishma Dev said, okay, fine, that's fine. I can give in to that, because he wanted his father to be happy. But then Satyavati's father said, well, what about your children, your sons? They may want to be king. Then they may challenge this promise you have made. So Bhishma Dev then said, okay, fine, I will not marry you. And because he took such a terrible vow, it is called, his name became Bhishma. Bhishma means terrible vow. And before that, his name was Devavrata. So the demigods were so pleased, they showered flowers upon him. And his father was so pleased with his unselfishness that he blessed him. He would die when you want to. So when Bhishma Dev fell in the war, it wasn't an auspicious time. He wanted to pass away when the sun was traveling in the northern hemisphere. Right? That means when our days in the southern hemisphere become shorter, right, as we're approaching winter. So that when that point was achieved on Bhishma Astami, that is when he actually left this world. So while he was lying there on the bed of arrows, he actually gave instruction to Maharaj Yudhishthira, like we can see in this picture, on how to rule a kingdom on so many subject matters. And so this actually benefited everybody who was there. And then the day after that is known as the disappearance day, the Navami, the 9th day, which was on Saturday. This is known as the Navami of the light half of the month of Magh is known as the disappearance day of Madhvacharya. Madhvacharya is actually an acharya in our line. Our line is called the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. It's named after Madhvacharya as well, because although it originates with Lord Brahma, Madhvacharya was a very important teacher who came sometime after Brahma, but who gave new life, we could say, to our Sampradaya, because he challenged the doctrines of the time of impersonalism. Okay? So after Shankaracharya had spread impersonalism, it had become rampant throughout the subcontinent. And the first teacher who actually appeared to dispel Shankaracharya's teachings is actually Ramanujacharya. We'll talk about him in a moment. So Ramanujacharya preached a philosophy that was somewhat in between Shankaracharya's philosophy and the philosophy of bhakti. And then Madhvacharya came and he preached more on the side of bhakti. But Lord Caitanya appeared and he synthesized both teachings, both the teachings of Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya perfectly. So they both presented different spectrums of the simultaneous oneness and difference, right? We know that Lord Chaitanya preached that we are at the same time like the Lord in quality, but different in quantity. And we had Ramanujacharya saying that we are more alike than different. And we had Madhvacharya saying we're more different than alike. Therefore, you can see his fingers are raised in the position of two, because he's emphasizing duality. We are different. We are different. We are not the same in any way. Right? So both of them, Ramanuja and Madhva, they both were needed, right, to present different aspects of the philosophy, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came and brought them together very nicely. So Madhvacharya is actually an incarnation of the wind god. He had appeared previously as Lord Hanuman and also as Bhima in the pastimes of Krishna and Arjuna. And now he had appeared to spread the message of bhakti throughout India. Right? He just like Ramanujacharya and Shankaracharya, he went throughout India preaching devotional service to the Lord, and he was more in the mood of dasyam, right, servitude. So therefore, this whole line after him was basically teaching about the servitude to Lakshmi Narayan or to Krishna without Radharani so much. We remember that Madhvacharya found the deity of Udupi Krishna, little Krishna. And then when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared and took initiation in this line, then he added all these other rastas above Dasya Bhakt, Madhurya Bhakti, Vatsalya Rasa, as well as Sakya Rasa. So he built on what Madhvacharya had actually brought to this line. So we're very grateful to Madhvacharya for all of his writings and all of his accomplishments in devotional service. And then the next day, the Dashami that is the 10th day of the light half of the month of Magh. This is the disappearance day of Ramanujacharya. So Ramanujacharya didn't appear in our line; he appeared in the line of Lakshmi Devi, right? Madhvacharya appeared in our line, the line of Lord Brahma. But the line of Lakshmi Devi is known as the Sri Sampradaya because Lakshmi Devi is known as Sri, one of the consorts of Narayan. The other consort, Bhu Devi, is actually the earth. Like we remember Lord Varaha rescued her. So Sri Devi started this chain of disciple succession, and then Ramanujacharya is a very important acharya who appeared to reform, right, this line and challenge Shankaracharya. He was one of the sannyasis who appeared a short time after Shankaracharya, and he was instrumental in establishing devotional service, right, over impersonalism. So he also traveled all over India. He also performed many wondrous feats, many miracles, and witnessed by him and also performed by him. And his contribution is quite invaluable to Vaishnavism. And so much so that he's actually an incarnation of Lakshman, of Anantashesh, of Lord Balaram, actually. And so he was so dear to Lord Ranganath, his Lord, that Lord Ranganath didn't want his body to be placed in Samadhi. Up to this day, it's actually being preserved, and you can see him in his sitting position, even though he disappeared thousands of years ago, 1,000 years ago. And this is you can have his darshan in Sri Rangam, right? You can see the temple of Lord Ranganath in the background on our right. And then was Ekadashi, the Jaya Ekadashi or the Baimi Ekadashi, right? This was yesterday. And the day after this Ekadashi is known as Varaha Dwadashi, right? The appearance day of Lord Varahadev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who appeared to save the earth and kill the demon Hiranyaksha, who had dropped the earth into the Garbhodaka ocean. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the Srimad Bhagavatam that Lord Varahadev had appeared twice. The first time he appeared in a white color, and it was just to lift the earth out of the Garbhodaka ocean. And then sometime later, when Hiranyaksha had dropped the earth or allowed the earth to fall into the Garbhodaka ocean, then the Lord appeared in a red color, and he lifted her up and he killed the demon. So both times he took this wonderful form of a boar, because a boar is known to dig for things in the mud and in the dirt. And so Lord Varahadev dug for the earth at the bottom of the Garbhodaka ocean and saved her. And his form is always transcendental, even if it is in the form of a boar. Right? It's not the same as any ordinary animal, or even any person. Right? He's always transcendental, whichever form he takes. Something I didn't know, I found out today, is very interesting. So Srila Prabhupada says that the forms of Lord Matsyadev and Lord Varahadev, they actually don't exist in the spiritual world. Right? The Lord doesn't take the forms of an animal. He is, of course, present by his names as a four-armed Vishnu form, as Varahadev or Matsyadev. But when he comes to the material world in particular, he takes these forms. And we know that these forms are also eternal, in the sense that when he disappears in one material universe, he appears in another material universe, and he displays the form for his pastimes. But then outside of the material universe, he doesn't actually display these forms at all. And tomorrow is the most auspicious appearance day of Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's principal associate and his elder brother. Lord Nityananda is the expansion of Lord Balaram. They're actually non-different. And he's even more merciful than Lord Chaitanya himself. And we remember this from the past time of how he delivered Jagai and Madai, even when Lord Chaitanya wanted to kill them. So Lord Nityananda, he's the son of Harai Pandit and Padmavati. They're both Brahmins. And he appeared in the village of Ekachakra, which is near the place of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance. And he was charmingly beautiful and extraordinarily learned, and absorbed in the pastimes, pastimes of the Lord as a child. And then when he was 12 years old, a traveling Brahmin, asked his parents to allow their child to go with him as his servant. And so Lord Nityananda traveled throughout India on parikrama with this very extraordinary sannyasi. And eventually he actually took initiation from Madhavendra Puri. And he went to Vrindavan, and there he awaited Lord Chaitanya's appearance, and Lord Chaitanya's starting the Sankirtan movement. This eventually happened when Lord Nityananda was about 32 years old. He's about 12 years older than Lord Chaitanya. And at that point, he went to Navadvip, and they met very joyously, very ecstatically. And after that, he assisted Lord Chaitanya in all his Sankirtan pastimes. So when Lord Chaitanya took sannyas and went to Puri, Lord Nityananda went with him. But Lord Chaitanya sent him back to preach in Navadvip. He wanted very much that Lord Nityananda would spread the holy names. Lord Nityananda went back, and that he did. And he also got married to two very wonderful girls who were the incarnations of his wives as Lord Balaram. Right? So the names in Lord Balaram's Leela are Revati and Varuni. So they're incarnated as Janava and Vasudha, respectively. So Vasudha had two sons, had two children, sorry, Ganga and Virabhadra, and then Vasudha passed away. So Janava raised these wonderful children, and she gave initiation to Virabhadra, also known as Virachandra. And she actually, after the Lord's disappearance, she actually continued preaching very wonderfully, and she was actually a very senior devotee at the time, giving inspiration and shiksha to many, and diksha to many devotees. So Lord Nityananda disappeared into a deity called Bankim Rai, a deity of Krishna that he himself had found in Ekachakra, and this deity is still there to this day. And amazingly enough, that's not the end. The day after Lord Nityananda's appearance day, I don't think there's any pastimes, but the day after that, which is Saturday, is this coming Saturday, it is the appearance of Narottam Das Thakur. It's also one of Krishna's rasa dance, the commemoration of one of his rasa dances. So Narottam Das Thakur was a very powerful preacher in the line of Lord Caitanya. So he's known as the second generation because he came after the six Goswamis of Vrindavan. The six Goswamis got direct instruction from Lord Chaitanya, and then after that were these three powerful devotees, Narottam Das Thakur, Srinivasacharya, and Shamananda Pandit. So all three of them, they were responsible for taking the writings of the Goswamis throughout the rest of East India, and this they did, but particularly preaching in Bengal and Orissa. Narottam Das Thakur was instrumental in this, particularly in preaching, initiating devotees, in writing devotional songs, which we sing to this day, and developing new styles of kirtan. He was an exceptional pure devotee and preacher. So we will just have a little bit of kirtan, I think, if we have some time, just to glorify these wonderful persons, and we pray for their mercy on all of you. It's a very auspicious time, so may we all make the most of it to pray for their mercy and their blessings and their guidance for us to make spiritual advancement towards their devotional service. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol. Jaya Baladev, 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 Jaya Baladev, Jaya Baladev, 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 Jaya Baladev, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur. Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Krishna Thakur Hari Ki Jai, Radharani Ki Jai, Vaishnav Thakur Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Krishna Thakur Vrinda Hari Hari Bol. Right. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining today, for your kind attention, and for bearing with me. We went on a bit more. And please join us next week, and we pray for Lord Nityananda's mercy on you all, Lord Radha's mercy on you all, the mercy of all the great devotees, and Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Hare Krishna, everyone.